Welcome to this Arnall-Culliford Knitwear tutorial. I'm going to show you how to work basic 1x1 helical stripes using double-pointed needles. There's a really clever trick that you can use with double-pointed needles so that you don't need to slip stitches in the way that I would use for any other needle type. Helical knitting allows you to create a jogless stripe fabric. You don't need to carry your yarns up the inside of the work, so your fabric is completely smooth on both sides, and it's almost magical. If you'd like to know more about helical knitting, or find out about our eBook, Something New to Learn About Helical Knitting, do visit our website, acknitwear.co.uk. When you work one row stripes in the round normally, because you have one spiral of stitches, at the beginning and end of the round you reach a point where one stripe in the old colour sits next to a stitch in the new colour, and this creates a visual jog line in the knitting. So when you work traditionally, you also have to carry your yarn up the inside of the work at the end of the round, and so you get a bit of a ridge as well. Working helically sets up multiple spirals of stitches, and so every stitch in one colour always sits next to the same colour stitches, and so you don't get that visual jog and you never have to carry the work up the wrong side. Here's a sample that's been knitted helically, and here's where the dark grey has been introduced. This is where the extra spiral stitches has been started, and it's been ended up at the top here. But apart from the start and end points, if you look at the fabric, you'll see that the stitches continue completely smoothly all the way round. There's no jog point at all. It's not that the jog has been minimised, it's that there is no jog whatsoever. If you look on the inside, excuse my ends, but if you look on the inside of the knitting, there is no point where the yarns have been carried up. It's just completely smooth spirals of stitches. I'm going to show you now how to knit helically to create 1x1 stripes. When you work 1x1 helical stripes on double-pointed needles, you can make use of the fact that you can leave your yarn accessible at the end of any of the needles in your project. I'm set up here to have my stitches on 4 needles and to be knitting onto a 5th needle, and I've worked some rib, and one round has been knitted in yarn A, which is the dark grey Storm, and I've joined in yarn B. I've knitted it in behind the stitches, ready to use yarn B from the beginning of the round. The beginning of the round is at the end of the needles here. So I'm now going to knit 3 needles worth of stitches with yarn B. So here was our start of the round, and we've left yarn A there attached to the last stitch on that needle, and we've knitted 1, 2, 3 needles worth of stitches with yarn B. We're now going to leave yarn B here because we never knit over the last needle in a particular colour. So we leave yarn B here and we turn around and we pick up yarn A again. And having picked up yarn A, we're now going to knit across 2 needles worth of stitches. If you look, we have already got 1 needle worth of yarn A. If we knit 1, 2 more, then we will have 3 of yarn A in total, and we'll have 1 of yarn B remaining, and we always want to leave that last needle in the previous colour. So we're now knitting 2 needles worth of stitches with yarn A. So our start of the round was here. We knitted 3 in yarn B, and now we've knitted 2 in yarn A. We've only got 1 needle worth of yarn B stitches remaining. So we're now going to return to yarn B by turning it around and picking up yarn B. And now we're going to cover up the yarn A stitches. And again, we're now just going to work 2 needles. From this point on, we'll just work 2 needles each time in the yarn that is in the minority. So here yarn B is in the minority, then we've got 3 needles worth of yarn A. So yarn B is going to work 2 needles worth. And now that we've worked 2, we've now got yarn B stitches in the majority, yarn A stitches in the minority, and so we know that we're going to be turning round and picking up yarn A and knitting round. So the key things to remember that you're always covering up whatever you've got most of, and that you never want to start in knitting on the needle where your yarn is attached. So once you've done those 2, you don't knit over the 3rd. If you do that, then you'll find that when you come to the end of this needle, you'll be left with 2 yarns joined to 2 stitches, one on top of the other. So the top stitch will have a needle in it, but the bottom stitch won't have a needle in it. And the danger is, over time, if you work all the way round to the yarns like that, at that point you'll get over-tightened stitches which will make a visible lump in your work, which kind of defeats the point of working in such a smooth jogless method. If you prefer to knit with 3 DPNs in your stitches and then onto a 4th double pointed needle, then you'll just need to set up ever so slightly differently. When you start working, you'll have 3 needles worth of yarn A stitches. So in that initial setup phase, you'll then work 2 needles worth of yarn B stitches. So the principle is still the same, that you never start knitting onto the needle where the previous yarn is joined. So to set up, you'd knit 2 needles of yarn B stitches. You'd then return to yarn A, and this time, in order to try to catch up with yarn B, you'd knit across 1 needle. We've now knitted 1 needle worth of yarn A. We can't knit the next one because that's the one that yarn B is attached to. So now we just turn round, and again we just work 1 needle in each of the yarns before swapping. So I'm now going to knit 1 needle with yarn B. And to carry on, we'd then just move around and pick up with yarn A again. It's very straightforward. Whether you're using 5 DPNs or 4, I hope that you now feel like you can tackle a helical striped project. If you'd like to know more about helical knitting, and there's way more information in our new ebook, Something New to Learn About Helical Knitting, do visit our website acknitwear.co.uk, and thank you ever so much for watching.